say is at a crucial stage. It's not because of foreign wars we wage. It's more to do with the colors blue and red. Too many laws and too much government. Can you tell me where the Constitution went? The Bill of Rights is just hanging by a thread. So many people trying to cross the border. Politicians build a new world order. Too many minds are convinced they should be led. I've gotta be free the way God made men. And I won't be ruled by the damn UN. Taking your right to self-defense. They say you're safer but they don't make sense. Dangerous ones will not turn into guns. All the unions always ask for more. All we buy is made out of foreign shorts. Come a day when there'll be real hell to pay. I've gotta be free the way God made men. And I won't be ruled by the damn UN. Damn UN.
Hello and welcome to today's broadcast of Tap Into the Truth. Hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are and whatever you may be doing, with all the usual caveats, of course. With you as always, I'm your ever so humble host, Tim Tapp, coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee. And for those of you listening to KYAH 540 AM, thank you for joining me this Sunday evening as I bring a little East Tennessee flavor to Utah's Talk Authority. Now, as those of you who listen to the show regularly are aware of, yesterday, just last night, we were discussing a new allegation being directed towards former Vice President Joe Biden. Seems that there is now a movement afoot to hashtag MeToo Crazy Uncle Joe. Well, naturally, since Crazy Uncle Joe is in fact making every indication that he's planning on running for the highest office in the land, he had to make a response. So, as of this moment, a spokesperson for former Vice President Crazy Uncle Joe responded to the sexual harassment allegations made against Biden this past Friday by former Nevada Democrat State Senator Lucy Flores, who of course claimed that Biden acted blatantly inappropriate towards her at a 2014 political rally. Flores is, of course, a former member of Bernie Sanders' political group, Our Revolution, and she alleged in a piece that she wrote that Biden made her, quote, feel uneasy, gross, and confused. If you missed yesterday's broadcast, by the way, you did miss me actually give direct quotes from her statement, which included such wonderful tropes as, I hadn't washed my hair, and now he's smelling it. Anyway, it's an interesting admission. Anyway, quoting again, I felt him getting closer to me from behind. He leaned further in and inhaled my hair. I was mortified. He proceeded. I was embarrassed. I was shocked. I was confused. I wanted nothing more than to get Biden away from me. Oh, how sad. Now, and I don't mean to diminish it, but the way she retells the story is, well, it seems a little discombobulated, which I suppose could be a legitimate effect of being in shock and then still remembering this and then thinking that crazy Uncle Joe had went away. Anyway, Biden spokesman Bill Russo has officially responded to the allegations in a statement saying, and I quote, Vice President Biden was pleased to support Lucy Flores' candidacy for lieutenant governor in Nevada in 2014, and to speak on her behalf at a well-attended public event. Neither then nor in the years since did he or the staff with him at that time have an inkling that Miss Flores had been at any time uncomfortable, nor do they recall what she describes. But Vice President Biden believes that Ms. Flores has every right to share her own recollection and reflections, and that it is a change for the better in our society that she has the opportunity to do so. He respects Ms. Flores as a strong and independent voice in our politics and wishes her only the best. Anybody else chuckling? Anybody else get that little Wayne smile as you hear that obvious political doublespeak? Basically, I never meant to do that, so please don't me to me, is basically what that says. Imagine you're at a work and a male colleague who you have no personal relationship with approaches you from behind, smells your hair, and kisses you on the head. Now imagine it's the CEO of the company. If Biden and I worked together in a traditional office, I would have complained to the HR department. But on the campaign trail, there's no clear path for what to do when a powerful man crosses the line. This is Flores in another statement, by the way. Now, the timing of the allegations, like I already pointed out, could not come at a worse time for crazy Uncle Joe, as he is thought to be nearing his decision to enter the 2020 presidential race and is currently the front-runner despite not having yet announced. It says a lot about the strength of the Democratic field, doesn't it? Anyway, reported on CNN this Thursday, former Vice President Joe Biden is out front in a poll by Quinnipiac University this Thursday. And with 27% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning voters saying they'll vote for him in 2020 primaries if he runs. Biden is contemplating a campaign for the White House in 2020. And there is speculation that he is close to entering the presidential field. He is followed by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders at 19%, former Texas Representative Robert Francis O'Rourke at 12%, and Senator Kamala Harris at 8%. All of this according to the Quinnipiac poll. Now, this is part of the report from CNN still. Of course, they naturally didn't refer to O'Rourke as Robert Francis. They like playing the identity politics game too, so it was Beto O'Rourke. Beto, better known as Robert Francis. Okay, so recently discussing Anita Hill, who accused Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas of sexual harassment during his confirmation hearing back in 1991. Joe Biden just said, quote, "No one's entitled to hold any public office. They have to make their case. The presumption should be if the woman comes forward, she's likely telling the truth." I'm pausing for just a second to let that sink in for a minute. Joe Biden said, talking about Clarence Thomas, that we should take the woman's word as truth. Does he want that applied in this case? I mean, it was a very carefully crafted response where they didn't want to say, no, she's wrong, because unfortunately everybody in and around the soon-to-be campaign of Crazy Uncle Joe, they know that there is literally a plethora of images, video and photo, all kinds of, well, what most of us would consider to be pretty solid evidence of similar creepy behavior, where the visuals from the females involved, some of them underage, some of them rather youngish children, makes it quite clear that everyone involved, other than Crazy Uncle Joe, is pretty dadgum uncomfortable. But in the world of politics, you have to learn to walk a line. And when you're part of the party of identity politics, then it's required. It's par for the course for you to find a way to acknowledge without admitting where your shortcomings are. Well, no one here remembers it that way, but hey, you know what? We're not going to criticize. We're going to say, hey, you should be free to bring this forward. You should be free to express yourself. And thank goodness, thanks to people like Crazy Uncle Joe, we now live in a society where you can do that, where women can be treated this way. And Crazy Uncle Joe, in his statements about Clarence Thomas, reiterated several times that it was in fact a failing on his part at that time, that he shouldn't have pushed harder, that he shouldn't have just let it go, shouldn't have taken it at face value. He should have tried harder to stop Clarence Thomas, because obviously he, much like Brett Kavanaugh, must be guilty of horrible, heinous acts against women because someone simply made the accusation. Never mind the fact that in the case of Clarence Thomas, there was actually a full-on FBI investigation in which things were left where they were. Just an allegation. Nothing moved forward. Not because Clarence Thomas had any particular power over the FBI. And in fact, the only reason the FBI did a full investigation of the event, rather than the standard background check to become a justice of the Supreme Court, was because Anita Hill worked in the office. It was a workplace situation involving a federal governmental office. So, with that in mind, it was the FBI's jurisdiction, and they, in fact, did a full investigation. So, there's some pretty good reasons why, Crazy Uncle Joe, that things were left as they were, and Clarence Thomas was confirmed anyway. There was no evidence other than what certainly appeared as if it was a politically motivated accusation. And again, it's just the way it looked. The evidence available made it appear that way. I'm not going to sit here and say that Anita Hill was flat out lying. I'm not going to make that assertion. I wasn't there. I don't know. All I know is that the evidence that we have available to look at, the situation that we should be considering as it was laid out, makes that appearance. So we are within our rights to proceed accordingly. Then, when we had the same thing with a lot of different circumstances involved with Brett Kavanaugh, where Miss Fancy Pants comes up out of nowhere, Blasé Ford, and makes these accusations that can't be corroborated with anyone, including the people that she named to help corroborate the story. The fact that they insisted that there was full-on criminal behavior going on that should have involved law enforcement at the time would have been impossible for the multiple background checks that the FBI, in fact, did perform involving Kavanaugh as he stepped from one court to another before getting to this new level that he had yet another background check done, what was it, 14 separate background checks during the course of his career as he changed from one position to another. And something of that level would have shown up if there was anything to it during one of those background checks. Somebody somewhere would have said something. Period. That's the way these background checks work. I don't know if you've ever had a background check performed by the FBI. I myself have not had a background check done on me by the FBI, but I have been questioned in regards to other people who were having background checks done for security clearance purposes. So I know the kind of questions that are asked, and I know the links to which that they go to try and discover if there are any obvious reasons, or maybe a few not so obvious reasons, why someone should not be moved forward, whether it's in a position in a federal job that requires trust, or whether it is to acquire a new or a higher security clearance level. Also, for much the same reasons, you must be deemed trustworthy. You must be deemed to have the kind of track record that puts you in this situation. So, with that being said, we're now looking at crazy Uncle Joe, who was happy to say, probably because maybe he's getting up there a little bit and doesn't remember as clearly as he once did. Maybe he doesn't recall that the FBI did this investigation into Anita Hill's allegations. Maybe. I mean, he's already saying he doesn't recall this event in 2014. So how can we expect him to remember all the way back into the 90s? It's a long way back. Let's get into the Wayback Machine, time travel. Or let's just look at all the pictures and videos available of Uncle Joe doing the same kind of thing to a multitude of people, particularly at political events. The track record is pretty clear here. Even if we aren't going to do the believe all women, which is a bad idea in the first place. I mean, if you're making a criminal allegation, then we need to go into the realm of due process. We really do. And we should do that for Uncle Joe here as well. I'm not dismissing. But I am saying, based on the track record, based on the hundreds, if not thousands of pictures and videos that we've already seen, memes that are probably going all over Facebook and Instagram and every other place, I mean, all over Twitter, who knows, probably going by this very second by the hundreds of thousands. We have seen them all. We know he has a track record of making women feel uncomfortable. Now, whatever his motivation was, we know that's happened. Is crazy Uncle Joe just the victim here, or he's doing something that he doesn't realize makes these women and young girls feel uncomfortable? If that's the case, then okay. That doesn't make it all right, but at least that's forgivable. Or at least it should be. I know there's a lot of third wave and now fourth wave feminists that are probably screaming at that statement too. No, it's not forgivable. How dare you? But at the end of the day, it should be your intentions, your true intentions, where your heart is, that has more to do with whether you're forgiven or not than how someone else perceived your actions. Now, it gets tricky, and I know that sounds almost very leftist because, you know, the ends justifying the mean and all. We had good intentions, and not so much. If you didn't take the time to research your stuff, or if you're following someone else who's just telling you and you don't do your own due diligence, then your only intention was to follow someone else. That's not a good intention. Following should be something that you actually make some pretty strong decisions about before you choose who to follow. You know, if you're going to get behind a leader, like we have very many of those, but if you're going to get behind a leader, then it's up to you to decide if this individual is worth following. If you're going to get behind a political policy or political ideology, then it's up to you to do the due diligence, not just soak up all the propaganda, but actually dig in. Find the negatives that the people that are trying to sell you this bill of goods don't want you to know. Find the things they don't want you to see, and then decide, well, do I still think that the good outweighs the bad? Because no matter what we're talking about, whether you're talking about an economic system, a political philosophy, or just some celebrity turned politician that you want to follow, there is going to be plenty of both. There's going to be plenty of bad that goes with every good. So then you have to know what these bads are so that you can weigh the options. And you need to be able to understand that with every bad there is some good. There are very few situations in the realm of the political and within our culture war that everything is completely and totally black and white. And if you aren't able to see at least some level of nuance, at least some part of the time, then it's you that's the ideologue. And as an ideologue, you're never going to be able to make peace with those who feel differently than you. You're never going to be able to make peace with someone choosing to implement something other than what you think is best. And sometimes you shouldn't. But I'm far more inclined to look at somebody who actually is taking the time to do the due diligence, who isn't simply an ideologue, and who in fact has at least a grasp on the concepts involved. So, yes, I do think that if honestly you come from a generation where you believe that that's a way to be supportive and that you're just trying to be pleasant and promote positivity, then I can see where possibly that could be perceived by the next generation that doesn't see it the same way as being something completely different. And in those cases, should Joe Biden be forgiven for that activity? If he honestly meant no harm, then maybe so. But, and here's a really big but, even though I said it really quietly, there is still that very strong possibility, because in most of those pictures we were talking about, in most of those memes and video clips, especially with the women who are old enough to know better, a lot of times it looks like Joe Biden is kind of enjoying himself in a way that's not the same as just trying to be supportive or friendly. So if that is the case, if that's really what was on Joe's mind, he's going to have to convince me, because I'm not buying it. I'm not ready yet. The ball's in his court. He needs due process. But since he's welcomed the criticism and welcomed the statement and said it's great that we live in a land where this young lady that he evidently made feel uncomfortable, at the very least, made her feel uncomfortable, possibly assaulted, he's going to have to do the work. He's opened himself up to her claims with this statement. Even though he's made a denial, he's made it clear that it's okay for these statements to be out here, so he's going to have to defend himself. And I'm ready to listen. Hey, Uncle Joe, I will listen wholeheartedly. I will let you make your defense. I will be happy to hear you make your defense. And most certainly would be extremely pleased if you can make a convincing case. So, say it out loud, or at least it should. It's not really me that Uncle Joe is going to have to convince. It is, in fact, the Democratic Party, particularly the Democratic voting base, because if he doesn't convince them, then he is about to be Me Too'd. All right, so I'm going to take a little break here. Let's play a little Matt Fitzgibbons. Check out patriotmusic.com if you get an opportunity, please. please help support my friend Matt Fitzgibbons. Great historian, great musician, good friend to the program, and so kind of him to let me utilize some of his music. Gonna play this, gonna dig a little deeper into the vaults than we normally do, and gonna just use this to transition into the next story. So stay with me, enjoy this Matt Fitzgibbons, and I will be right back.
Some say we should trade freedom for safety in these times. Some betray us in the courtrooms and rule it saying God's a crime. What can I do? What can I say? How can I help us understand the price we'll pay if we don't stand today? Most of the world would like to see us fall, tell us how to live without a help from their friends inside to steal what we won't give. Guard your guns like the founders warned, and keep the Constitution clear. Learn to use both instinctively and fear, What can I do? What can I say? How can I help us understand the price we'll pay if you won't stand today?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and that's one of my another one of my favorite songs from him. It's really well timed, and the verse is phenomenal. I like the message, and I love Matt Fitzgibbons. Love him as a brother, love him as a historian, and we've had some great conversations. I really do need to try and convince him to come back on the show sometime. It's been way too long since he's been on, and we even had a fun break from politics show one time with him. You can find it back in the archives if you're so inclined, where he came on and we just played a bunch of his music, and we just talked about the songs, and it was a lot of fun, or at least I thought it was anyway. Had pretty good responses from most of you guys out there, so I'm assuming that the majority of you enjoyed it. So let's move on with the shows, shall we? Came across this story, and I really, it was one of those moments, you know. I try to stay even-keeled, especially when I'm just reading stuff, but some of the stuff it infuriates me. This goes beyond a battle in the culture war. The headline is, University of California uses Trump's executive order on free speech to defend a professor who said cops need to be killed. Yeah, that's right. Freedom of speech is a double-edged sword. And we've talked about that quite a bit. We talk about it a lot because it's important to remember that is, in fact, the case. It is a double-edged sword. If you're going to encourage free speech, it means you are occasionally going to have to tolerate some things that you don't particularly want to hear. But as I have said on a multitude of occasions, the proper application of the First Amendment guarantees that you will be offended at some point in your life. The proper application of the freedom of speech guarantees you will be offended, which is why I think so many folks in my generation and the generation before me have so much issue with the snowflake crew. These folks go around fearing being triggered, demanding trigger warnings, which still don't help, demanding safe spaces, demanding cry closets, and in true snowflake fashion, still have meltdowns at the instant that they're faced with ideas or truths or facts that they simply don't like. Some of which don't even directly affect them, but if it somehow makes them unhappy, it's meltdown time, it's crybaby time, it's come on guys, get over yourself time. In true leftist fashion, these people embrace the idea of freedom of speech as long as it's their speech, as long as it's speech that agrees with them. Don't you dare challenge them. Whereas here we are now facing this free speech executive order, which I'm still a little iffy on in the first place. I'm kind of thinking that this kind of still falls into overreach. I didn't like it when Obama wrote a bunch of executive orders that were definitely overreach. This one, I really do need to take a closer look to kind of decide if I feel like it really is or isn't. But based on what I've seen to this point, I kind of feel like it is. So, I don't want to sound like I'm all supportive of it in the first place. But if this executive order is going to be treated as if it is enforceable law, and I definitely hate that idea, we do have to understand that freedom of speech does work both ways. And the one thing the left is really good at is using our own ideas and philosophies and beliefs against it. They weaponize it against us, which is why we have thicker skin. We have to understand. But there are still some limits to free speech, and inciting violence happens to be one of those limits. So I'm not certain exactly that this should indeed be used in this fashion, but let me give you the details. So earlier this year in Davis, California, police officer Natalie Corona was shot and killed while responding to a call about a car crash. While Corona was conducting an investigation into the cause of the crash, a man riding a bicycle, later identified as Kevin Douglas Limbaugh, approached the scene. He shot Corona as she spoke with someone involved in the crash. She fell. He kept shooting. He then began shooting bystanders. He fled into the nearby residence and, after a standoff with other officers, committed suicide. All this according to the Washington Post. Now, at the University of California-Davis, a reporter for the student newspaper, the California Aggie, decided to use the officer's death to look into rumors that a professor on campus had previously advocated for cops to be killed. Nick Irvin, the reporter, found several tweets disparaging police from Professor Joshua Clover, who teaches English and comparative literature. One of the tweets said, quote, "I'm thankful that every living cop will one day be dead. Some by their own hand, some by others. Too many of old age. Hashtag, let's not make more." That's just one tweet from November 2014. Another one read, quote, "I mean, it's easier to shoot cops when their backs are turned. No?" That's from December 2014. In January 2016, Clover gave an interview in which he said, quote, "People think that cops need to be reformed. They need to be killed." Clover, naturally a fan of Marxism, naturally stood by his previous tweets and, confronted by Irvin, said, quote, "I think we can all agree that the most effective way to end any violence against officers is the complete and immediate abolition of the police." Clover said that. I guess saying we're going to abolish the police is much better than saying go out and execute them. But considering some of the earlier statements, what's the big difference? It's pretty much the same. Now, when asked for more information, Clover directed Irvin to the family of Michael Brown. Of course, you know, that's the young black man who was shot in Ferguson. You know, the whole purpose for the fake hands up, don't shoot lie. Now, Brown was shot in Ferguson after attacking a police officer and then running towards him once again. The media, of course, framed the death as officer oppression, spreading the debunked claim that Brown had his hands up in defense when he was shot. And that's been debunked. It was debunked before the media started running with it nationally, and we still saw national football teams come out doing their little touchdown dance with their hands up. We saw them coming out onto the field with their hands up. All the BS in a show of solidarity with a man who was a common street thug who had just robbed a convenience store and then committed an act of violence against a police officer and then was coming to try and take the firearm away from him. The officer had no choice but to shoot in self-defense. Nobody's hands were up. But again, the lie has been ingrained into the subconscious of the social justice warrior. You would be hard-pressed to find someone in the other side of the political spectrum that even realizes that the story's been debunked. They certainly haven't taken the time to look into said debunking. Again, this is one of those parts where, you know, at the end of the show, when I remind you not to take my word for it and tell you to be prepared to put in some effort to do your own research and then to use your brain, this would be a great example of a great time for folks on the left, especially the social justice warrior crowd, to do exactly that. Yes, it doesn't fit into the narrative. Yes, I realize that you're not going to get what you want from finding the truth. But just like with Jussie Smollett, we have a simple fact of life here, and that being that every time something like this is convoluted and twisted into something it's not, it diminishes all the real occasions where police officers stepped across the line. It diminishes all the real occasions when minorities have been, in fact, victimized in violent ways by people that think differently and aren't willing to be tolerant. It does diminish every real instance when we have to conflate, confuse, or flat out hoax an incident. Plain and simple. There's no question about this. But they're not going to do it. They're not going to they're going to buy hook, line, and sinker, and then they're going to defend their standpoint if it becomes completely destroyed as a storyline. If the narrative comes unglued, they're still going to defend themselves. They're going to make a case for why it's still important to know that this kind of thing does happen, rather than recognize the fact that it doesn't happen as often and as commonly as they want us to think. It's not the big, huge problem that there is. And the real thing that continues to be brushed away is that more often than not, it's folks that typically stand slightly left of center that are far more likely to commit acts of violence over intolerance of others' viewpoints. That's certainly a part that they don't want included in their narratives. But anyway, as we continue with the article, Irvin reached out to the UC Davis administrators, who of course condemned Clover's statements earlier and said that the school supports law enforcement, and they did so once again. Oh, those are terrible statements. We support law enforcement. Then on March 4th of 2019, UC Davis Chancellor Gary S. May sent a letter to California Assemblyman James Gallagher, a Republican, regarding concerns about Clover's past statements. On Thursday of this past week, May sent a follow-up to Gallagher discussing the steps the university took to address Clover. Now, if you're at a point where you realize that you need to address one of your faculty, maybe the best thing to do is to find a way to no longer have him as part of your staff. I know that gets a little harder if they have tenure and all that, but there are still ways. Anyway, as part of the letter, May wrote that while the university feels Clover's statements are offensive and abhorrent, they did not meet the legal requirements for true threats that might exempt them from First Amendment protection. Of free speech. Now, because of the need of an executive order to protect free speech from conservatives on campus, now is trying to use this executive order as part of their defense. We don't think this actually raises to that level. We don't think it actually is that bad. I mean, it's bad, but it's not that bad. In the letter, it actually says, in addition to existing state and federal constitutional requirements, the university is subject to President Trump's March 22, 2019 executive order directing federal agencies to take steps to ensure that institutions receiving federal research or education grants promote free inquiry in a manner consistent with applicable law, including the First Amendment. Failure to protect the First Amendment rights of university faculty could not only lead to legal consequences for violating the Constitution, but also could result in a loss of federal funding, which is critical to the university's research and teaching missions. This, May wrote, along with state and federal law, is the reason the university will not review or investigate Clover's public statements. This is the excuse. Now, I'd like to take a moment, just a very brief moment, coming in, swooping up, and taking you to jail for something you said. Now, again, there are still exemptions there. If you're out here invoking violence against people, if I was to sit here and start talking to you and preaching a message of going out and attacking some other group, some group of people I didn't like, let's take the fight to the streets, let's do this, and it not only encourage you, but start giving you orders, and maybe even organize to a point, give you a location to show up because we know a bunch of whoever this group was, if we were going to go do that. If I was doing that, then I am actively engaging in criminal speech. It's not protected. In fact, primarily protected speech is mostly of a political nature. I can say mean and hateful things as long as I'm not having a call to action to violence. That is the only thing, the only protections you have. So this First Amendment bit, calling an action is where the lines are. And from the tweets that are here, this professor stops just short of that, just short of. And in fact, I think you could make a case, if you look through enough of these, that on a couple of occasions, he's very subtle about it, but the call to action actually is there. It's just not explicit. Now, a prosecutor would have to want to make that case to have anything legally done. But because it's not a direct call, it probably would still get tossed out. But that doesn't mean that the university has to accept it. It doesn't mean that he's free of consequences. Let's say that he was an athlete instead of a professor. Let's say that he was a professional athlete and he had several endorsement deals. Now, Nike not being the greatest example of this, given their love affair with athletes who aren't currently working, athletes who have done silly things to their own careers. Yeah, I'm talking about Colin Kaepernick. When it comes to their association with things like these, Nike's not the best example. But let's say, for example, for some strange reason, Nike suddenly went back to caring about who's endorsing their products. It is within their rights, if they deem that suddenly an athlete that they had a shoe deal with or they had a T-shirt deal with, Nike does a lot of apparel, whatever the deal was, if suddenly they got involved in some type of anti-Muslim tropes, because the left's going to hate that. You got to be woke. Now, you can get away with anti-Semitism, but don't you dare be anti-Muslim. Don't you dare be anti-Islam is really what I should say. Because I'm anti-Islam. I don't have a problem with Muslims, because nobody suffers more under Islam than other Muslims. But, people don't understand the difference, and I can't seem to help them to if they don't want to hear it. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. If you're a regular listener, then you know already what I'm talking about. I want to protect Muslims from the philosophy of world domination that everyone calls Islam. But let's say some pro athlete said something anti-Islam. Say they were part of the counter-jihad movement all of a sudden. Well, then Nike would be perfectly within their rights because of the public perception to cut ties with that athlete. And it stands true for any other business in any other set of circumstance. Now, I don't think that Nike should do that. But in a case where someone's doing an endorsement, there is more involved with the imagery involved. More appropriately, let's say that you worked for a food manufacturing company and you were a low-level manager, and your input, while vital to the actual functioning of the company, wasn't particularly huge within that company. And let's say that suddenly somebody found a 12-year-old tweet that you put out saying, gee, that's gay. And then all of a sudden, oh, look at these homophobic statements. Well, first of all, out of context, you don't know what that really means. You're adding your own context. Would the company be within its rights to decide to cut ties with that manager? Yes, they would be. But under the circumstances, I don't think they should. A company should stand by, especially if something's that old. We saw this with this certain award ceremony, wanting a certain comedic actor to host their ceremony until they found out that these old tweets were out there. It's ridiculous. It is completely and totally ridiculous. But that's where we're at. Should this professor face consequences from the university for these statements? Well, that's ultimately for the university to decide. I tend to think when you go around saying that we'd be better off if all the cops were dead, and then making a statement like it's easier to shoot a cop from behind, hey, that almost sounds like you're giving directions to me. There should be some kind of punishment. But the university using the First Amendment as an excuse to not even investigate it shows a fundamental lack of understanding of the First Amendment in the first place. That being said, it's a ridiculous story, and it needs to be further looked into. Again, I understand proper application of the First Amendment. He's going to say some stuff that I'm not going to like. I can choose to walk on. I don't have to read his tweets. I can ignore him. I certainly don't follow him on Twitter. Of course, the amount of time I spend on Twitter is so little, it doesn't really matter who I'm following usually. That's another story. The end of this story is a simple one. The university, regardless of their public statements, are prepared to support this professor, this part of their staff, no matter what he says, more so than they care about the well-being of the students on their campus or the very fact that they themselves may actually need law enforcement's help at some point in the future. All right, with that being said, going to take a little break. We're going to play a little more Matt Fitzgibbons right about now. Then we'll do the Edwards Notebook and the Songs and Stories for Soldiers. And I may play another tune before I come back on, too, because we're getting close to that bottom of the hour break. And honestly, still not feeling great from where I was feeling off the other day. So you guys just stay with me. We'll do the Matt Fitzgibbons, and then we'll do these public service announcements, and then we'll be right back. I've got two more stories to get to, so including the one that the show's titled after. So stay with me. I'll be right back. Here's some more Matt Fitzgibbons. Check out patriotmusic.com, please.
In 76, with a stroke of a pen, Jefferson declared the rights of all men, that God made us free, and that government serves to protect all the rights that each soul deserves. And in 78, under cold winter skies, troops were aware they were out of supplies, and with the food all but gone and no shoes on their feet, they fight till the end, till the British defeat. Then the Bill of Rights stated what they'd earned, and the lesson that hurt was well learned. Died so we could be free and remember with pride we've made it this far, though that paper is old, but the meaning is clear to all who are told. With the Bill of Rights wounded And the freedom we keep must be earned. Because the lesson that hurts is well learned.
In just a short time this year, over 90,000 illegal border crossers have invaded our republic. But yet, many individuals, both in and out of government, are willing to sacrifice our national sovereignty and safety because they hate President Trump more than they love America. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, in 1997, President Clinton declared a national emergency to protect citizens of Burma. George W. Bush declared a national emergency to protect the citizens of Belarus. In 2006, Barack Hussein Obama declared a national emergency to protect citizens of Burundi. In 2015, President Trump declared a national emergency to protect the citizens of the United States in February of 2019. The only emergency declaration that American congressional lawmakers had a problem with is the one that President Trump declared to protect our national sovereignty. Now that speaks volumes of how little the elitist, leftist, and rhinos regard you and I and our republic as a whole. They are part of a huge effort to literally do away with our Christian heritage, our liberties, personal responsibilities, Constitution, and rugged individualism, as well as our exceptional nation as a whole. For the sake of our future generations, we cannot allow that to succeed. I'm Ron Edwards.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
Dan Perkins here with your Songs and Stories for Soldiers Veterans Tip of the Day. An important stride was taken on March the 5th when the President signed an executive order creating the Prevents Program, specifically designed to address the problem of veteran suicide and homelessness in the United States. The President pointed out that nearly 70% of all veteran suicides are by vets who have never been in contact with the VA. Another part of this new program will provide money for homeless vets to buy housing for themselves and their families. We have to do a better job of helping inform vets what options they have to improve the quality of their lives. Here is your tip of the day. If you hear this spot, go to your nearest VA facility and ask for help. Tell them you want to know about the new Prevents program. You can also go to songsandstoriesforsoldiers.us for updates. This has been your Songs and Stories for Soldiers Veterans Tip of the Day.
With every walk of life, from the homeless to a prince. They say it's been a long, long time that we haven't earned it since. It guides the heart, fills the soul, teaches to be true. And they can't take that away from you. No, 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 no. You know your rights are not like laws. They can change or just ignore. They're there to claim by every soul, like so many did before. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I can see it in your eyes. It depends on what you do. They can't take that away from you. No, 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 no.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. They cannot take your rights away from you, but you only have the rights you are prepared to stand up and fight for. And that ultimately is the truest test of this nation. We have sat back for far too long and allowed our rights to be slowly eroded. We've allowed them to take them from us, and we haven't even stepped up and fought for them, usually because we're being promised a little more comfort or this notion of a little bit of protection or safety. No. So check out patriotmusic.com if you want to hear that song and lots of songs like it, plus a lot of great merchandise now. Like I said, Matt is always working on brand new projects, so you never know when you're going to come across something new at patriotmusic.com. If you've already checked them out, by all means, go back and visit again, because like I said, you never know when something new is going to pop up. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the primary story that I wanted to look at today, shall we? This is kind of out there. It's definitely a culture war story. And I think most people are probably going to just let this blow by and not pay too much attention to it. But it does have both the constitutional protections question involved to it, as well as our willingness to fight for our constitutional rights. It's pretty much a double-edged story, if you will, because there are two sides to this, and both sides have legitimate points. And unfortunately, I do tend to think that a federal judge probably overstepped his bounds in an attempt to, rather than rule based on the Constitution, attempted to interpret the Constitution. So on this past Friday, a federal judge in North Carolina, a state, I might add, that just saw its 20-week abortion ban invalidated, this particular past week by a different federal judge, it ruled that a charter school's mandate that female students wear skirts equal protection under the law clause of the 14th Amendment is pretty straightforward. It was one of the Reconstruction Amendments after the American Civil War. It was designed to make sure that official government bodies in the southern United States, former members of the Confederacy specifically, did not institutionally discriminate against former slaves. That was its intention. And it's pretty straightforward about that. But, this notion that equal treatment under the law is one that I think most of us can and should agree on. However, this, as so many other constitutionally accepted truths, has been stretched and stretched to mean more and more things that simply it was never meant to cover. And I think this might very well fall into that category, because skirts as part of a dress code is fairly common among schools, especially preparatory schools. And I don't think anybody would argue, at least not before this ruling, that a private school has every right to set a dress code. And that dress code can and should be enforced by the disciplinary of said school system. I think what most people fail to recognize also is that within public schools, the right to establish a dress code is in fact also completely legitimate. There are good reasons for having health codes in place. Now, the requirement specific to a skirt, that is something that maybe you can argue has something to do beyond normal health situations, but it certainly still falls within the realm of a school to establish a dress code and to establish the rules therein. Now, according to the Associated Press, reading from their report now, a North Carolina charter school promoting traditional values engaged in unconstitutional sex discrimination by requiring girls to wear skirts, a federal judge has ruled. Now, you see, I love how they play that out. See, just the way they tell the story, they're telling you, this school did this. And then near the end, according to this, which is the first place where you might start to question. They're not making a report that the judge ruled this. They're making a report that the school did this, which is not this story. Not really. But it's typical media propaganda. It's the way the mainstream media tries to control the narrative. It's part of how they control you. They understand words have power. They also understand that the order in which they tell the story has power. That's why when they do admit in a news story, when that does actually happen, the bits and pieces they really don't want you to know, they bury it 5, 6, 12 paragraphs deep into the story because they know you're not likely to read much more than the first couple of paragraphs if you're even the kind of person that does more than read the headline in the first place. Which, sadly, if you're still reading newspapers, then you're a reader. But if you're checking this out according to the Associated Press with the AP online, then probably not so much. So they bury the lead in every case. That's the common colloquialism. You buried the lead. So anyway, they continue. U.S. District Judge Malcolm Howard ruled that Charter Day School can't, I repeat, cannot enforce the skirts-only rule as part of its dress code that punishes violations with suspensions and even expulsion. No child has been expelled for violating the dress code since the school opened all the way back in 2000. And Howard admitted that in his decision that was filed this past Thursday. But girls are clearly treated differently than boys at the kindergarten through 8th grade school in Leland, about 10 miles west of Wilmington. That's a violation of the U.S. Constitution's equal protection requirements. But is it? Is that a violation of equal protections? You establish a dress code. I think we're all in pretty fair agreement that it is not unreasonable to expect girls to dress in one way and boys to dress in another. Now, if you want to make the argument about, well, what if you're transgender or whatever, first let me say, shut up. That's not what we're talking about here. But if you want to get into that, then however you identify, you should still meet the requirements of the dress code. Let's face facts. Most kids don't like dress codes at school anyway. They want to wear what they want to wear. Sadly, we have situations where sometimes what these kids want to wear, or even worse, what in some occasions their parents want to dress them in, simply isn't appropriate for school. Sometimes because it serves as a distraction from learning. Sometimes because it literally is a health risk. So regardless of the idea behind this, a skirts-only part of the dress code for girls, I do not think is an actual violation. This is a charter school, which, charter schools by nature are kind of legally unique. They're a little different than most schools. They kind of operate in that murky middle ground somewhere between the public and private schools. Now, again, as it's literally explained in the Associated Press article here, charter schools actually are public schools, but they're funded by state taxpayers, which makes them public schools. But they're allowed to do a lot of different things. They don't fall into the same curriculums, and they don't fall into the same standardized guidelines as the traditional public schools. So they have a lot more freedom within their districts. So, again, a dress code that's a little stricter at a charter school than at the other public schools within said district is also not unusual. In the case of Charter Day School, it's run by a nonprofit organization, but contracts with a for-profit company to run business and academic operations. So it's getting funding from taxpayers, but it's also operating outside of the realm of the county system altogether. Now, as the Hill reports, the plaintiffs, who initially sued back in 2016, alleged that the dress code makes the girls colder than boys during the winter and also forces them to pay constant attention to the positioning of their legs during class, distracting them from learning, and has led them to avoid certain activities altogether, such as climbing or playing sports during recess, all for fear of exposing their undergarments and being reprimanded by teachers or teased by boys. Now, the ruling from Judge Howard is hardly the only controversial Equal Protection Clause constitutional ruling having to deal with sex discrimination as of late. As reported at the Daily Wire, a federal judge in Texas recently ruled that the male-only U.S. military draft was unconstitutional. And even though there really hasn't been much of a buzz about that since we talked about it, since its initial inception, it is still kind of a big deal within certain circles. Folks are still worried about what's that going to really mean for the draft? Is it going to mean an end to the draft altogether here in the United States? Or, what they're really concerned about, does it mean they're going to start drafting women too when and if the draft is ever instituted? All of a sudden I'm having trouble with simple words. Reinstituted and utilized in the event of a military event that requires it. Reading this from the Daily Wire. A federal court judge in Texas has struck a blow for feminism. You'll guys probably, if you are regular listeners to the show, you probably remember this, as we did talk about it over a better part of one show. They struck a blow for feminism, ruling that a men-only draft is, in fact, unconstitutional and represents an instance of gender-based discrimination under both the 5th and 14th Amendments. This case balances on the tension between the constitutionality enshrined power of Congress to raise armies and the constitutional mandate that no person be denied the equal protection of the law. According to what the judge wrote, he also added that a decision was needed because Congress had been debating the issue of drafting women for decades with no result. According to the Supreme Court in Hogerfeld versus legalizing gay marriage across the country, supposedly, the judge noted, the government has an obligation to make decisions on issues of gender equality quickly and must determine immediately whether such discrimination serves an important governmental interest today. Now, all that's a bunch of fancy way of saying, you know what, Congress isn't going to do it, so I'm going to do it for them. That is clearly an overreach of his power. The judicial does not have the power to legislate. Now, if there's a legitimate case in front of you, yes, it's nice when the courts decide to move a little bit faster than we normally see them do it. But even the again, for some reason, I'm not wanting to say the name of the case right, but the case that supposedly legalized gay marriage, even in that case, tremendous overreach because, number one, it should have never been heard in the federal courts. This isn't about equal protections because the legal standard for equal protections is, does the law read the same for everyone? Does it treat you precisely, identically, regardless of what specialty group you fall into? And in this case, heterosexual and homosexual alike are both denied the ability to do the same thing. That meets the legal standard of equal protections under the law, a fact that they want to ignore and push this notion forward. The bottom line is there is no constitutional right to marriage. There is no federal government power over marriage. And in truth, the only place where the federal government has any business in trying to define what it accepts as marriage is in your tax forms, because they choose to give civil unions, in this case they refer to as marriage, a particular tax status. So they get to define it, but they have no power over it. None, because it's not a government issue. The very fact that states want to issue licenses over this also constitutes an overstep that actually is rooted in racism, if you want to do your homework on that. And remember, don't take my word for it. Go do your own research. The idea of the marriage license, where the states get involved, it still goes back to a racial aspect in its inception. It's all, again, the state recognizing a civil union, a civil partnership. It's a very specific type. But in truth, actual marriage, the actual spiritual bonding of two people together in a holy state, has no role at all that requires government intervention. So the courts, even the state courts, really don't have any, zero, nada authority to be involved in this. It should have been booted out. It should have been, hey, this is a state issue. States are the ones that are going to issue the licenses. It's up to you to go win the battle, go win the hearts and minds, go fight your culture war in every state. And that's where the feds should have left this. They don't have the authority to do this. But everybody wants to say, oh, well, the Supreme Court ruled. Well, guess what? The Supreme Court issued an opinion. That's what every court does. They issued an opinion. That's why there can be changes. Yeah, we stand on, we're looking here at what we have as precedent, and so we'll run with the precedent. Well, that's what we'll do. Okay, fine. Except what happens when the precedent that's set no longer matches your social values? Well, then it's preposterous. Absolutely preposterous. I mean, we don't have to look any further than Roe versus Wade and then the Citizens United. We'll throw those two cases out there. Roe versus Wade, every leftist in the country will scream at the top of their lungs, settled law, settled law. It's been decided. Why do we keep talking about this? But then Citizens United is mentioned. The Supreme Court made a mistake. We've got to overturn that ruling. Things have to change. So, which is it, boys and girls? Again, I like being lectured about how I'm a science denier from people who don't seem to be able to tell the difference between boys and girls. I like being lectured by a judge who doesn't seem to understand the limit of his authority. I like being lectured by a judge who's going to tell people, who's going to render an opinion that's going to be treated like it's binding law, who wants to interpret the Constitution rather than just read it and go from there. There is not a great deal of complicated language in the Constitution. It does require you being able to read above a 5th grade level. I pray to the powers that be that the majority of Americans still fall under that criteria. If not, we are doomed. But all you have to do is read to a 5th grade level and you can understand the Constitution. It is pretty straightforward. You might, and unfortunately, because of all the muddying of the water, all the smoke screens that leftists have put out there to try and rain on the Second Amendment and rain on other things to put some level of confusion there, you might need to go back and study just a little bit to get some historical context. You might need to understand when the framers of the Constitution wrote down the phrase, in order to maintain a militia, in order to maintain a well-regulated militia, they weren't talking about formal, and enunciation being important, they weren't talking about formal military. They were talking about the average citizen. That's who the militia was. There was no standing army at that time. In fact, the founding fathers didn't like the idea of a standing army. They didn't want a standing army. They didn't want organized police forces. They didn't want a centralized bank. They didn't want a lot of things that unfortunately tends to lead to personal and political corruption. They didn't want the government to ever be in a place where they can use these institutions as weapons against the people. They wanted the government to constantly serve in silence, to serve the American people without forcing their will, without imposing their will on the people. They wanted the people to be well-armed, well-regulated, and ready to stand up if the government overstepped its bounds. But we're just not there anymore as a culture. We're not even taught anymore that was the mindset. That's not some crazy radical view. That is what they believed. That is what this nation was founded and built upon. That is what the idea American bargain is supposed to be. We are responsible for us, and the government does the bare minimum we need them to go do on our behalf, not on their own accord, and we must subjugate ourselves to them. That is not how this nation was built. It is not how it is supposed to be. And until we recognize and realize that that's the case, we're going to continue to be in poor shape. The Republic the protection. Now, why so passionate over this one ruling? Like that these girls aren't being treated fairly at this school? The other thing about most charter schools is the fact that ordinarily you have to apply to get there. You have to do something above and beyond to attend a charter school within your district. You have a regular public school that you are free to attend. There was a reason why either you as a student or why your parents wanted you to be a student at this school instead of the one that you would have ordinarily went to. And as part of the expectations of attending that school, you should have to abide by the dress codes laid out, even if they're radically different. We only really start running into problems with the dress code if they are forcing you to violate religious precepts or if they're forcing you to violate norms of decency. If you fall into one of those two categories, then there should be an issue. Now, that's not to say that the school couldn't make some kind of exception for colder weather. Like something that can be worn underneath the skirt. Still have the skirt, but have something that will help keep the girls warmer. Or will let the girls have better protection from visual accosting. Whatever phrasing you want to do. The school should be able to still maintain its dress code. And the parents, if you've really got that problem, try to put some pressure on the school to make an exception or two without changing the code. There's nothing wrong with that code. Nothing at all. Well, why should I have to wear a skirt just because I'm a girl? I don't know. Why should I have to wear a skirt just because I'm from Scotland? But you call it a skirt and I bloody well will smack you upside the bean because it's a kilt. And by the way, if you're a little girl at this school and you're wearing your skirt and you're concerned about what people are going to see up there, imagine if you were a Scot. Because when we're a Scot and we're wearing our kilt, we're not wearing anything underneath. It's just what the good Lord gave us. It's not a sideways smile, ladies. Stop peeking. Regardless, Why does it take a federal court to make this decision? This should have never made its way to the federal level, period. But this particular ruling, and I hope they appeal it, is an overstep of the bounds, because the 14th Amendment's not being violated because the school has a dress code. The 14th Amendment isn't being violated because they say boys will wear this uniform and girls will wear this uniform, and that's what you're going to be wearing. There's not a violation there. Are they being treated differently? In so much as they are themselves different, yes. But does that mean they're being discriminated against? No, that's not discrimination, especially when these expectations are made clear before you can become a student in this school in the first place. If you knew the skirts were part of it going in, you got no excuses to whine about it afterwards. None. Now, I know that's a popular activity among people that lean a little to the left. I mean, look no further than the statements that the political operations, the Democratic Party and the mainstream media made when we were talking about Donald Trump and his accepting of the results of the election. Are you willing to state today that you will accept the results of the election? No, I'm not willing to say that right now because I don't know what's going to happen between now and then. And if something suspicious should happen, then I might should appropriately say, no, that's not right. And I should probably be willing to fight it. If you guys try to pull something funny, I should be prepared to fight it. So I'm not going to say I'm just going to accept the results. Oh, did you say such a threat to our democracy? Boys and girls, we don't have a democracy, by the way. We have a constitutionally federated republic. So please join me in every time you hear someone say our democracy, inform everyone within earshot we don't have a democracy. Just tell them that. It's a constitutionally federated republic. That's what we have, not democracy. Democracy equals mob rule. Democracy equals two wolves and a sheep getting together to decide what to have for dinner. Democracy equals the minority always loses. The American bargain is built on something deeper and more meaningful and more sturdy than the idea of mob rule. The American bargain is built on the very notion that minorities will be protected for the very same reason we can never let go of the Electoral College in favor of the popular vote when we decide who our president is. It's an extra layer of protection in the event that a con artist manages to Pied Piper the American public. And it's a level of protection to make sure that the population centers alone do not determine who becomes president. It's a way of protecting minority voices, something that our friends on the left claim they desperately wish to do. They claim it's their life's work. Then why, our friends on the left, are you so hard at work trying to decimate every protection minority voices have in this country? The Electoral College being one of them. Tell me why. That's all I'm saying. All right, so with that having been said, it's pretty straightforward that this case is worth talking about, not because these young girls are being forced to wear skirts against their will, not because these young girls are being forced to dress less warmly in the winter, because like I said, the schools should probably be willing to make some kind of accommodation for weather purposes. I will grant them that, but that's something that the parents and the school should have been able to work out without going to court. I will, however, not grant that there is any violation of the 14th Amendment, that there is any actual sex discrimination taking place here. This school sells the notion of more traditional values. That's part and parcel of what you're buying into when you try to get your kid into that school instead of the public school that they ordinarily would attend. So no, this is not a violation. It's not any more of a violation than if a private school demanded it. And that also, just FYI, if any leftist is accidentally listening to this part of the show and says, hey, what about this? That also is not a violation. It is not discrimination. Dress codes actually are a part of all public schools as well. It's just they're usually not particularly strict. That's all. Now, with that having been said, let's do a little more Matt Fitzgibbons. I'll take a brief break, and when I return, we will get into the next story. So stay with me, guys. PatriotMusic.com. People, check it out.
Seems like 1,000 years since we had real fears, but the old ones won't forget. These broken levee walls had a few close calls, but they haven't fallen yet. And you know the rain's coming, the rain's coming. All your days and all your nights, it brings a storm on you. When the sun beats down and it bakes the ground, and you watch the rich land die. Such a vicious drought, even hope's in doubt. But there are no clouds in the sky. But you know the rain's coming, the rain's coming. All your days and all your nights, it brings a storm on you. When you feel the first drop fall, when it kisses your skin, the storm will begin to bring with it promise of change. When you hear the thunder roll, the lightning's begun, the flood will soon come to wash out the things that remain. Storm on you. The rain's coming, the rain's coming. All your days and all your nights, it brings a storm on you. Yeah, yeah. The rain's coming, the rain's coming. All your days and all your nights, it brings a storm on you. Because the rain's coming, the rain's coming. All your days and all your nights, it brings a
We'll be having some fun there. I wanted to start giving you a heads up. I'll mention it throughout the remainder of the week. Check it out. And for those of you listening to KYAH 540 AM, Utah's Talk Authority, remember on Saturdays, Ron Edwards' Experience is rebroadcast there just a couple hours after you hear the Saturday replay of Tap Into the Truth. So on that day, you'll get a full double dose. You'll get to hear me in the full Tap Into the Truth mode, and you'll get to hear what I sound like being broadcast directly from terrestrial radio. In the meanwhile, what do you say we actually go ahead and get back to the show instead of doing the housekeeping thing? So, here's something that also makes me kind of it makes me want to shake a leftist. That's what it does. It makes me want to just walk right up, hear them spout off some leftist ideology, and I want to just say, well, what about this? Now, I don't like whataboutism, per se, but I definitely don't like it when the left uses their circular logic to completely ignore the flaws in their ways of thinking. This is one of those stories that kind of irritates me. Now, I did mention how this past week Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez took this picture of some illegal migrants that were being held outside because there was no room left inside. And she kind of inadvertently helped make the case for why we do, in fact, have a crisis at our southern border and why Donald Trump is not wrong in wanting to try and make something positive happen there, to try and make some changes, to try and discourage these people from just putting their own lives at risk, taking a sometimes tragic and always dangerous journey from parts further south than Mexico to try to get to the Mexico-United States border, where they are then treated as if they're suddenly in the land of milk and honey. That is not what the United States is. And most of these people are fleeing countries that have natural resources, that have the kind of beauty and nature and farmland that's capable of providing them everything that we have worked for and built here. In some cases, even better, depending on how far south you go. They can grow stuff there that we can't grow here because of the temperate region. And, ask a leftist, because of climate change. But that being neither here nor there, the point still stands that these folks have something that's worth fighting for in their homelands. But they're encouraged to just say, forget it. Fighting's hard. We'll just go where it's easy. Here in the United States, with the right people in charge, they'll just give us stuff. We don't even have to go legally. And now we got a bunch of people that will help coach us in the event that we get caught so we can pretend like we're just seeking asylum. So, Border Patrol is literally holding lots of people in an outdoor area that basically, in the picture, it looks like it's an overpass that has been fenced in. So at least they have a roof. Now, it does look inhumane. It's not a pretty picture. It's not kind to humanity. But it kind of does make the point, and thank you for that, AOC. It kind of makes the point that something does need to be done. Now, AOC was not the only prominent Democrat in the House that shared that picture and added their own quotes. Representative Ilhan Omar, who has literally called for the defunding of the entire Department of Homeland Security, because that we don't need that. She was expressing her outrage over the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, calling the conditions that illegal aliens, she did call them illegal aliens, by the way, the conditions that illegal aliens were being detained in, calling them, quote, abhorrent and inhumane, and a reflection of white nationalism. Now, I think the last part's probably a step too far. It is not white nationalism in play. In fact, again, white nationalism, just like alt-right, is some phrasing that those fine folks on the left are trying to manipulate to change the meaning of. Anyway, white nationalism does not automatically equal white supremacy. And it's really the white supremacist that you should be concerned about. Those are the folks with the broken mindset that does nothing but breed violence. White nationalism just means you happen to be white and you happen to be a nationalist. You can be a perfectly okay, swell guy and be a white nationalist. I believe in America first. That makes me a nationalist, boys and girls. And I do. And that doesn't mean that I don't believe in Canada. It doesn't mean that I don't believe in the UK. It doesn't mean that I don't believe that these nations should also rise up and be part of an international community where we all embrace each other in brotherhood and fight for individual liberty. Not for democracy, but for individual liberty. That we all strive to have republics of our own. That we all strive to institute constitutions that are very similar to ours right here, and that we return our constitutionally federated republic back to its default position instead of having acquired all these extra constitutional powers they never had any legal claim to grab in the first place. Anyway, I digress. She tweeted, quote, "This is abhorrent and inhumane." Naturally, she's talking about the conditions that this one particular group of illegal migrants are being detained in. She continued saying, "It's without a doubt a reflection of what white nationalism is doing to our country. As a country, we have to acknowledge that this is how people are being treated here and decide that we are better and we must do better." And you know what? To a degree, I agree. I agree. Something must be done. And that something is build the wall. Build the wall. Because if the wall is built, it will deter right off the bat 70%, if not more, of these people that are endangering themselves and falling victim to human traffickers on their way here. We can help reduce the level of violent crimes. We can help protect the lives of these people because they will not be encouraged by our current set of standards and policies and procedures and bleeding heart, tree-hugging ideologies. They won't be encouraged by those things to break our law and come here and get free stuff. And whether you like it or not, you can say anything else you want about it. That is still the primary motivation for most of the people that are coming here. That's not even addressing the folks that are trying to illegally cross our border that are straight up legit criminals, that are already hardcore criminals, violent criminals, gangsters. MS-13 mean anything to anybody? Thugs, drug runners, members of the cartel, kidnappers, terrorists from other countries that are skirting on across so that they can commit acts of terrorism here in the States later. There are legitimate, true, hardcore criminals committing crimes other than just crossing our border, which the left seems to think is perfectly okay and not really a crime at all. I disagree with that assessment, folks on the left, but I'm pretty sure, folks on the left, you recognize the fact that rapists and drug runners and human traffickers and people that are snagging children and selling them into slavery, I'm pretty sure that you agree that that is pretty illegal. I'm pretty sure you agree that we should be making efforts to stop them. And if you don't agree with those things, then I'm pretty sure you're not somebody we should be listening to anyway. If you don't have the common sense to realize that there is dangers to the American public and to the American citizenry in the current policies, then you don't belong on the stage. You do not deserve to have a platform, and no one should be listening to you. Period. Welcome to America, free speech and all. You got the right to say it, but that doesn't mean anyone should be paying any attention. Period. Outside of that, Miss Omar, you want to talk about us doing better. You're concerned about non-citizens. You're concerned about people who have no legal right to be on this side of the border in the first place, even the nice ones. Sorry, you don't belong here. There's a right way and a wrong way to come across our border. Even if you are seeking asylum, even if you are just seeking a better life, there's a right way and a wrong way. And if you take the wrong way, you should face repercussions. And some of those repercussions should be after a short detainment, and I would really prefer it be short. It's, in fact, the insistence of the leftists that they have a level of due process that we do not have an obligation to give them. Again, due process is pretty well protected for citizens, and the Supreme Court itself has determined, they have ruled, they have opined on multiple occasions under various Chief Justices and under various split counts of who's a leftist and who's not. They've determined a multitude of times that people who are not citizens are entitled to exactly the amount of due process that an administration is willing to give them. So they're already getting way more due process than they deserve. They're giving way more due process. Let me rephrase. Maybe deserve isn't the best word there. But they're getting way more due process than they are necessarily entitled to. They're not entitled to it. What about human rights? What about human rights? They had the human right to stay home. They had the human right to fix their problems at home. They had the human right, if they were going to leave their home and seek asylum, to seek asylum legally. They have all kinds of human rights. I'm not against immigration, but that immigration has to be legal. I'm not against providing safe haven for actual asylum seekers, but they have to seek asylum in a legal fashion. These things are what the left wants you to ignore. So I don't have a great deal of sympathy for folks who choose to illegally cross our border. Even the ones who aren't gangsters and aren't human traffickers and who aren't drug smugglers, who aren't kidnappers, who really are just looking for a better life. I can empathize with that. I can sympathize with that. But I am not willing to concede the fact that we should ignore the fact that you broke our laws to get here. And no one else should be willing to do that either. But boo-hoo. What's the ultimate goal of the left in this case? Well, it's not about who's coming across. It's not about border security. It's not about humanitarian efforts. It's not about being nice to our neighbors who need a hand up. It is strictly about Cloward and Piven. It's Cloward and Piven, Cloward and Piven, Cloward and Piven. Don't know what I'm talking about? Look it up. Use your brain. That's what this is. For years, Cloward and Piven advanced the narrative that was the roadmap for the actual destruction for the United States of America. They recognized in their time that the United States of America, because of the spirit and the will of the American people, they would never be destroyed from the outside. They could only be destroyed from the inside. They could only be crushed if they collapsed in upon themselves. And an unfettered, open southern border is an excellent way to cause this nation to collapse in on itself. No matter what ball of wax any leftist tries to sell you as their rationale for supporting an open border policy, that is the true intent. And even if they truthfully, honestly, are simply trying to help the less fortunate, then they have not done their due diligence to realize the best way to help these folks is to take care of America first. The United States of America is in a much better position to help other countries when we're on a stronger footing here. When we're strong at home, we can be stronger abroad. When we're stronger at home, we can provide more aid abroad. When we're stronger at home, we can be a better force for good in the world in total than we can if we are weak at home, if we are divided at home, and if we are economically crumbling. Which is exactly what will happen if we continue an unfettered, open southern border policy. And definitely do not buy it when some Democratic politician tells you that they're against the wall, but they're not for open borders. If they're not for stricter enforcement of if they're not for stricter enforcement of our immigration laws, then they are for an open border. There is no middle ground there. There is no gray area. This isn't one of those nuanced areas I was talking about at the top of the show. This is pretty much black and white. If you don't want our immigration laws enforced, then you want an open border. Because our current immigration laws do not have a closed border. Our current immigration laws, if simply enforced, just makes it a little harder for people to get here illegally. And it actually provides punishments for people that break those laws. And if you're somebody who crossed the border illegally, the biggest punishment in most cases is you just get sent back home. It should be business owners. There should be business owners in this country that pay stiff policies for hiring these people, knowing they're illegal. It should be people that help falsify documents to help these people get legal jobs, who should face stiff prison punishments. These people are making money off of the misfortune of people who endangered themselves and in many cases their children to get here. But regardless of all of that, back to the point, Miss Omar makes these points. Miss Omar is ready to stand up and talk about how bad we are to the people in the rest of the world. But Miss Omar, so dedicated to the tenets of Islam, so full of anti-Semitic rhetoric, and then claims when members of her own party do try to stop her from being so openly Semitic, are simply imposing on her First Amendment rights. She has no problems pointing out the failings in America. She has no problems with pointing out the humanitarian crisis on our southern border, but is still unwilling to take the easiest fix, the quickest fix, and that is, let's move forward with building our fencing, building our walls, and manning our posts, and making sure that it's not an easy stroll across our border. That's the fastest way to cut nearly 70% of it. And then we can process these folks and then get them back home. Because that's where most of them need to be anyway. Because most of them aren't actually asylum seekers. They're not any real danger. It's just the economy sucks back home. Well, the economy's been bad here before. Where did we run to? Yeah, we don't have anywhere we can run, do we? We need to fix this mess, and part of fixing it is getting a handle on our borders, both southern and northern. How about that? But as quick as she is to point this out, she has no comment when it comes to, when it comes to things like Sharia law being implemented around the world. We have a nation state near the Philippines that is now officially instituting full Sharia. They've been under Sharia law for a while now. They have a sultan, legitimately, and they've been under Sharia for a while, but they haven't instituted some of the harsher penalties. They are officially in place now. The new Sharia laws that are going into effect, according to the Sultan, are a form of special guidance from God. Of course, he actually said Allah, of course. But, being that it's Sky News reporting the story and getting the direct quote, they're going to do the conversion because they know as soon as they say Allah, the rest of us are going to go, of course it is. So the nation is actually going to introduce death by stoning as a punishment for gay sex. And amputation for those guilty of theft under Sharia law, with both penalties to also apply to children once they're implemented. Amputation for theft. Stoning to death for same-sex activities. Again, the American LGBTQ community, I want you to pay close attention to how bad you have it here in the United States. You're being stoned to death in other places around the world. Of course, the other story coming out of the Middle East where where Palestinian terrorists, Hamas, recently fired 20 rocket attacks into Israel and destroyed the homes of innocent civilians. Sorry. When Representative Omar was asked if she could provide comment on either one of those stories, asked if she found either of these acts to be abhorrent or inhumane. Excuse me, sorry, it got down in my throat now. She was asked directly, do you find anything abhorrent or inhumane in any of these? Sorry, guys. Sorry. She's asked if she would say that these acts are due to radical Islam. She was asked these questions, and Omar and her office, they refused to respond to multiple requests for comment. They ignored it. She was unwilling. Okay, I think I'm good now. I was about to try to hit some music there because I don't know what was getting me coughed up here. I think it's just anger over this. Grr. Okay. So she was asked if she would be willing to say that these acts are due to radical Islam. Naturally, she and her office refused to respond to multiple requests for comment. So again, the office was contacted this past Friday via phone and email to give them another chance to respond and notified them that a non-response would be considered a refusal to condemn. Omar's office, again, did not respond to the inquiries. On late Thursday, Omar tweeted from her official congressional Twitter account a condemnation of conversion therapy. Conversion therapy, of course, can lead to depression, self-hatred, substance abuse, homelessness, suicidal behavior. Survivors have likened it to torture. It's time to defund conversion therapies with the hashtag there. I'm not sure if federal taxpayer dollars are being used to fund conversion therapy, but it seems clear that she wanted to not acknowledge the evils behind these two incidents. I would be remiss if I was to let you think that I honestly believed it was Omar herself that actually tweeted that. It's her official congressional Twitter account. Aides quite often oversee these things. How do we sound like we're not homophobic without acknowledging that Islam is great and Allah is perfect? Ooh, conversion therapy. A lot of leftists are against conversion therapy. I'll remind you once again, Omar's been embroiled in an anti-Semitism scandal since the very first day she arrived in Washington, D.C. Omar has been condemned multiple times by her Democratic colleagues for pushing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories used by Nazi Germany and using anti-Semitic tropes. Omar has compared Israel to the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism in media interviews, where she also has suggested that Israel should not be allowed to exist as a Jewish state. Omar has suggested that her Jewish colleagues devised a plan to silence her by accusing her of being anti-Semitic and suggesting that Omar was expecting one of her Jewish colleagues to have dual loyalties to Israel. Omar has claimed time and time again that pro-Israel groups are paying off U.S. politicians to have a dual loyalties to Israel. Omar's anti-Semitism is so extreme that House Speaker Nancy freaking Pelosi and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, while not using her name, clearly directed scorn at Omar during speeches at AIPAC this past week. Hoyer, probably with the strongest statements from any Democrat, saying, quote, "What weakens us is, instead of engaging in legitimate debate about policies, someone questioning the motives of his or her fellow citizens." Now, Hoyer said this in a clear shot directed at Omar, who, of course, has questioned the loyalties of U.S. politicians. He continued, "So let's have debates on policy instead of impugning the loyalties of Israel's supporters. I stand with Israel proudly and unapologetically. So when someone accuses American supporters of dual loyalty, I say, accuse me." Pelosi went so far as to suggest that Omar was anti-American in her speech, saying, quote, "This month, the full House came together to condemn the anti-Semitic myth of dual loyalties and all forms of bigotry, which a resolution that rejects the..." Sorry, I still got this going. That rejects anti-Semitic stereotypes in the United States and around the world, including the pernicious myth of dual loyalty and foreign allegiance, especially in the context of support for the United States-Israel alliance. I simply declare to be anti-Semitic. I simply declare to be anti-Semitic is to be anti-American. It has no place in our country. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, also took aim at Omar during his APEC speech, but I'm not going to spend much time getting into that. What I am going to say is, again, we see leftist hypocrisy at its best. We see this amazing set of circumstances, this amazing scenario where Omar believes that she can make any negative assertion against the United States that she wants to with no repercussions, and that it is somehow wrong if one of us points out where she is being a hypocrite. If you're going to call out dual loyalties, then perhaps you should at least try to have some loyalty to the United States of America. The only reason I don't make the accusation that you, Miss Omar, has dual loyalty, because the only loyalty I have seen from you has been to the people back in Somalia and to your Islamic ideology. I have yet to see you show any true loyalty to the country that allowed you to come here as a refugee, basically saving your life. Yeah, we're terrible. We're horrible. We're the evil villains, and you're here to set us all straight and spread the ideas of Sharia compliance as you move along. Maybe that is how you serve your constituency, because maybe your constituency isn't an American community, but is in fact a no-go zone within the United States that's been colonized by Somalian jihadis that are engaged in civilizational jihad. Maybe that's why you don't have to worry about dual loyalties, because your first loyalty, your second loyalty, your third loyalty, nowhere down the list is the Constitution of the United States. Nowhere down your list are the people of the United States of America. Nowhere down your list are the Christians and the Jews that live peacefully here and wish to continue to do so. Nowhere on your list is the American idealism that should be a guiding principle for anyone holding political office in this country, especially at the federal level, but at any level. I've yet to see that. So when I hear you willing to condemn acts carried out by Islamists as quickly as you're ready to condemn acts carried out by Donald Trump, then maybe I'll be willing to elevate you to a point where I deem you worthy of talking about your concerns. Until then, you are just background noise. But you're dangerous background noise. I'll remind all of America one more time, openly anti-Semitic. That's what Ilhan Omar is. Openly anti-Semitic. Nancy Pelosi calls it un-American. And Nancy Pelosi is Nancy freaking Pelosi. Someone needs to take a serious look at where we're headed. And that's going to have to be it for now, ladies and gentlemen. I've actually ran a little long, so, what am I going to do? Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut things off. But remember, don't take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Be prepared. Put in a little effort, but more importantly, to use your brain if you really want to tap into the truth. That's going to be it for now. Please check out patriotmusic.com if you get the chance. Also, please check out tapintothetruth.com. And I'm still stalling because I'm trying to load up into the player my playout song here. Da-da-da, it's not one to go. Now it's there. Where was I? Don't take their word for it. Don't take my word for it. Be prepared to put in some effort. And more importantly, to use your brain if you really want to tap into the truth. I'm out, everybody.
Is using both hands. Founders knew the Second Amendment was the final one to keep, to hold our other rights intact so we never become sheep. Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and Pol Pot, they told us things that you never forgot. Teach the lessons to your daughters and sons, to fear the government that fears your guns. Now the New World Order crew, well, they're making their demands. They don't feel safe if you are armed. You say gun control is using both hands. Well, I prefer the 3-0 win to the tiny 2-2-3. It gives me more than 1,000 yards to protect my family.
is using both hands.